the second video of the channel Vasexandros. I'm glad that you've decided to join and continue watching the videos. So today we're going to talk about the science fiction book By Bare Bones. So By Bare Bones was published around 2015, but it was written much earlier than that. It was written around 2005, 2006, and it was a culmination of some ideas that have been brewing for quite some time. This book is a little bit more unique in how it was produced and it came to grow than the other works that I did afterwards, in that much of it was actually inspired from conversations with people that I've had in the past. Through different situations, some ideas seemed to just piece together. And I found that there was a similar vein to many of them, and I really decided that it must be made into a book. So one of the ideas that came to me through another person was actually from a nurse, and this was around 2003 and 2004, when the nurse told me that they had seen a documentary about bears and how bears have a unique facility to regenerate their bones while they're in hibernation. And I thought to myself, wow, that's a great idea. I never knew bears were so unique in that, because astronauts have a big problem with deterioration and degeneracy of their bodies while they're in space. And there's different agencies that have tried to combat this by having rowing machines for astronauts in space and different forms of exercise to keep their bodies from deteriorating physically when they're in space. There's a very famous piece of equipment called the power plate that was invented by the Soviet space agencies, which was used for the astronauts to do very light exercise when they would return that would simply cause them to vibrate. And there was a time in which the power plate was very popular, especially in the Western world, and many gyms introduced them as a form of light exercise for many people. And there are many physiotherapists that consider it to be an interesting avenue for helping people that have injuries. So this concept of bears and how they have unique facility introduced this concept of people staying in space for a longer time. And in reality, this might be the future of the human race for many ways that the future might go forward for whatever reasons, either because of calamity here on planet Earth or merely for the adventure and exploration that's inherent to the human species. Another aspect about this science fiction novel is that of the concept of money. So money is a concept from the moment it enters people's minds and the way that they can deal with it in an abstract sense. And it governs people's lives to a large degree on their day-to-day, the medium outlook of the future, and the long-term outlook of the future. And for societies, it still looks like it's going to be a key element. So fittingly, it should also be a part of any science fiction book as well, or science fiction story nonetheless. There are some stories that seem to exclude this factor, but I consider that to be very interesting. But I would also like it if other stories would explain how the concept of money just disappears. Because that would have to be a key aspect of a possible future society and very memorable to the participants in the story. But while discussing these ideas with potential readers, I actually found out that it had become too much of a key component, and their reactions actually helped me understand how it could be and how the concept of money can evolve into an interesting avenue. And I consider that to be a key aspect of the book, and how the money and the concepts around it can actually drive people into different ways within a completely different society. Now, the key component to this story is actually that of identity. The question is, if technological advancements continue the way that they're expected to, how will people evaluate themselves as individuals in that future? How will people evaluate their value in a possible society where resources aren't so much of a question of survival, but might actually be considered a resource of choice? A resource of choice in the sense that the dissociation of a resource with survival becomes manifested to a larger degree, where people can dissociate and detach themselves from concepts of resources as being an actual necessity. So if there is an abundance and for aspects that are necessary for us to survive, if this abundance continues to grow, then why would people engage in the activities that are considered to be necessary to today's standards? So those standards might change, and then the perspectives of the meaning of life would change as well. Throughout time, most people's day-to-day activities was focused on survival. As we see today, many activities are actually so abstract and distant from the actual manufacturing of goods for their own survival that they don't even know how they originate, and they couldn't reproduce the majority of the goods that they use and they consume. They couldn't reproduce them. So if we were to take this to an extreme situation, extreme but in a humorous manner, so if we take it along the line of humor, we can create it to be as extreme as we want, and we could entertain ourselves with the idea of what such a future would actually be like. How could we imagine characters that we can focus on living such a life? And that is the key question. Because at the bottom of all our actions is a question of the exploration of ourselves. Every day that we live, we have lessons to learn, things to share, and progress to be made upon our own self and our well-being, both in our perspective of peace with the world and with ourselves. I'd like to read the third paragraph from the blurb at the back of the book. Fiction is speculation, and there is a lot of that going on concerning redundancy. Questions on individuality, what is work, and more. Tons of questions which get answered. Well, they get answered within this framework of a possible future. I'm not saying that that will be our future, but it's a possible future. And the key aspect is the question of redundancy has been around for some time. It's been pushed under the rug for quite a while, and now it's resurfacing itself. It's not as if this story made an attempt to make a prediction, but it was just taking one aspect of our society that was growing and imagining a world in which it continues to grow without stop. What would that society look like? It doesn't look at how everything would change, but some key aspects. Because if there are some key aspects that don't change, that relative difference will be kind of funny. And the question of redundancy is, at times it can be a little bit concerning, but the question is this. Redundancy is not so much of an exclusion, but a lack of necessity. And that's one of the key aspects about redundancy. We used to hear that word being used a little bit more often, and nowadays different words are substituted for the concept of redundancy in the workforce. And then the question becomes, if this redundancy becomes quite common, and it actually becomes the de facto standard, what becomes of work? Will work still have its same meaning? What if work actually becomes a luxury? What if work becomes a choice that actually people are striving to? What if people actually find peaceful redundancy to be a very common aspect of their future society, and that actually they would like to work but can't, not because they need to or it would change their life, but just because of some sense of fulfillment? And today, a lot of people might consider work to be a challenge, but there's many philosophers of the ancient past that would consider that if you can find enjoyment in your work, that is a very good thing and very healthy. So those key principles and outlooks of life are the background frequencies, the kind of baseline for the story. But as all good stories, the story actually focuses on three main characters: 2 from Earth, 1 from the Moon. They decide to go to Mars. Mars named after the god of war, and in ancient Greece it was called Ares. So Mars is effectively dedicated to war, and every sort of conflict, whether it's ideological, a conflict of where someone should go, it's a competition of ideas coming through and having to make a choice and try to create a new beginning. So this aspect of having Mars come in actually does define the path of the characters into their future, which takes them further deeper into space, but in the end brings them back to Earth after having passed through a session of becoming bears themselves to deal with the long time in space, and that actually has a key aspect. On the stock market, bears are noted for being a little bit pessimistic about the future, but actually by exploring some things that they do together, they find out that there is a strong source of optimism to be found, and that's exactly what they needed when they returned to Earth. If you decide to read by Bare Bones, I hope you enjoy it, and come back to the channel for more videos in the future.